Welcome back, class. Finally, on our last document, which is document F, this document is a poem, and it was a poem written by an English writer by the last name of Kipling. And we're going to go into a lot of detail with this poem and breaking this poem down. If you obviously are looking at the screen, you'll understand that. But as always, first things first, write down, please, a cultural motivation and political motivation. Um, Honestly, would be more cultural, but the way you can look at it in a different way also, and that would put it into the category of a political motivation also. But I'll explain that a little bit later. So what I need you to do now is I need you to circle his name, and then right above that draw a little line, and then I want you to write down that he was an English writer. He was a British writer. He was actually born in Bombay, India. India was the biggest colony to Great Britain, so a lot of wealthier British people lived in India, and Great Britain controlled India. So he lived there. He actually was born there, and he lived there for some time. And he saw all the effects of imperialism on the people, on the Indians, and the British, and what they brought to India. But what I before we get into that, go ahead and highlight the title of this poem, which is "The White Man's Burden," and then box in, please, the year that he wrote it, which is in 1899. So that title is very distinctive. It's "The White Man's Burden." And of course, if you don't know what burden is, I can explain it to you. But a burden is something that is weighing heavy on someone, something that is weighing or pressuring or pushing someone down, I guess you can say. Another way of looking at a burden is that it's a duty or it's a responsibility that someone has. So this will make more sense once I actually get into the poem. But if you notice right above where I circled his name and highlighted the name of the poem, I wrote a side note. So I want you to write down this was actually a poem aimed at the United States to get involved with colonizing like the Europeans. So at this point, the United States was very isolated. And being isolated means you're kind of all by yourself. You're not active or you're not involved with what is going on around the world. And you kind of keep to yourself. That's what isolation means or isolated means. So in this case, the United States is keeping to themselves and they're not getting into anyone else's business like the Europeans are, like the British, like the French, like the Germans, who are going into all parts of Africa and colonizing and taking what they want because they have this idea of racial superiority. They have this idea that it is okay to do that. So this poem is more aimed at the United States actually becoming active and getting involved with colonizing. Specifically, and I want you to write this to the right of document F, just like I did, specifically aimed at the U.S. colonizing the Philippines. Okay? So, once again, poem has to do with the United States colonizing and taking over the Philippines. So make sure that you have the highlights and make sure that you have all the annotations that are at the top of the document. Haven't even read the document yet, but make sure you hit pause if you need to and write down all those annotations and make sure you understand what each one means. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read. There's two stanzas in here. I'm going to read line by line and then I will explain exactly what is going on. So it says in the first line, "Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed." Okay, so we're going to stop it right there. And we're going to draw two arrows going out. We'll start off with the arrow going to the left. The U.S. will send the best people they have to do the job. That's what it means by send forth the best ye breed. The United States needs to send their best people to the Philippines to colonize. And it is their job, it is their duty to do this. It is their burden to go to the Philippines and to help out the Filipino people that are living there because they cannot do it themselves. They need help. So a bell shall go off in your guys' head. If they cannot do it themselves, the United States are superior to the Filipinos. Now, is that necessarily true? Absolutely not. But this is what he is saying in his poem. So, this is why it's a cultural motivation. This is why it's their way of thinking. It's the idea that the Europeans, or in this case, the Americans, are superior to the Filipinos. And it is the job of the Americans to go into the Philippines and to take care of these people. Okay? So make sure that you have those two annotations. Moving on. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. Okay, so from there, draw a little arrow out to the left. All those two lines are saying is the U.S. must help the Filipinos. And when they use the word captives, they are referring to the Filipinos as the captives. To wait in heavy harness. Now, heavy harness meaning when they get to the Philippines, they know that they are going to have a tough job to complete. They have this heavy, heavy burden that they need to take care of. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very difficult. Next line. On fluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen people, half devil and half child. Okay. So I want to take a look at that first line I just said or explained where it says fluttered folk and wild. So they are obviously referring to the Filipinos. And whenever I think of the term fluttering, I always think of like a moth or a butterfly, and they're fluttering and they're flying around and they really don't have a care in the world and they're free to do whatever they want. And you kind of have to look at the Filipinos like the moth, like the butterfly. The Filipinos are doing what they want, and they're wild and they're free to do what they want. But when the Americans go in, it is their job to tame them, to civilize them, to take care of them. And that is a very, very tough job to do, to control something that is used to being wild, that is used to doing whatever they want. But once again, that is that heavy burden that is mentioned. That's actually the title of this poem, The White Man's Burden. Then I want to go down the next line where it says, sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Of course, they are referring to the Filipinos. They're referring to the people in a way where they must be saved by the U.S. So he is wording this where you look at the Filipinos or the people that are being colonized and you look at them as not being able to take care of themselves. And they must get help from the stronger, more powerful, the superior people, which are, in this case, the Americans or the Europeans, if we're talking about Africa. Now, of course, is this true? No, not at all. But it is their way of thinking at the time. And once again, that has everything to do with the cultural drive or motivation. So make sure that you have those highlights for that first stanza and make sure that you have all those annotations for that first stanza. Moving on to the next one. Take up the white man's burden. Highlight that first line in the second stanza. They repeat this, and I draw an arrow going up and then right where I wrote, repeats to get the point across. They say this several times. Not only is it the title of the poem, but they say it multiple times in this poem. And this is only part of the poem. It's not the entire poem. So they say it a few times, and they say it obviously to get the point across. It's a burden, it's a responsibility, it's a tough job that the Americans have to go into another country and to civilize and to take care of these people. The savage wars of peace. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. Make sure you highlight that and then draw an arrow from peace going up. All this line is saying is that the U.S. will bring peace even if it causes a conflict or a war in the very beginning. So if they go over there to the Philippines and the Filipinos resist and there's a conflict, they fight against each other, they will fight. There will be a war, but eventually there will be peace. That's what he means by that line. Third line, fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. So draw a little bracket with those two lines connecting, and then draw a little arrow out to the right. All this is saying is the Americans are going to come in and they are going to provide food and medicine, and they are going to take care of these people. When I say these people, I'm referring to the Filipinos, but if I'm talking about the Europeans, I'm referring to the Africans. Okay. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, watch sloth and heathen folly bring all your hopes to naught. Okay. Make sure you get those highlights in, and then I want you to draw an arrow going down, and this is our last annotation, and this is a summary of those last 4 lines. When the goal is almost achieved by the U.S., so when they've gone to the Philippines and they've taken over and they have brought with them from the United States all of their culture and they have pushed their culture onto the Filipinos and they have civilized the Filipinos and they have taken care of the Filipinos and they've helped out the Filipinos, okay? Everything can be ruined in a split second by the captives. And when I say the captives, I'm referring to the Filipinos. Because according to Kipling, these people are lazy and they are uncivilized. So once again, you have a European author, Kipling, who is saying that these people, which are the Filipinos, are uncivilized. They're not trained. They're almost like savages, like animals. And it is the duty of the Americans to come in and to help these people, to train these people. But it is a very tough job or burden. And in a split second, like I said, the Filipinos or the captives could ruin everything that the Americans did once they've come in and taken over. So once again, guys, this poem, it's short, but it is very meaningful. There's a lot behind it. So make sure that you get those highlights. Make sure you have all the annotations so you fully understand what Kipling is saying in regards to this poem. Now, the reason why I mentioned it was a political motivation is because the United States is now going to be involved with imperialism. They're going to be involved with colonizing. And once again, it's a competition. And the goal of a competition is to win. And the only way to win this competition is to compete and get as much land as you possibly can, because more land equals more power. Once again, concludes our final document, which is document F. If you have any questions, please rewind, replay, or raise your hand if you're still confused.